Welcome to the Talent Equation Podcast. If you are passionate about helping young people to unleash their potential and want to find ways to do that better, then you've come to the right place. The Talent Equation Podcast seeks to answer the important questions facing parents, coaches, and talent developers as they try to help young people become the best they can be. This is a series of unscripted, unpolished conversations between people at the razor's edge of the talent community who are prepared to share their knowledge, experiences, and challenges in an effort to help others get better faster. Listen, reflect, and don't forget to join the discussion at thetalentequation.co.uk. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Talent Equation. Hello, how are you? Hope you've had a good week. Just wanted to jump in before we start this week's podcast, just to let everybody know that I think there's still a few more tickets available for the Talent Equation Live, which I'm doing at the end of March, 29th of March, up in Edinburgh with the fantastic support of the staff at Stuart Melville's College, joined by Sarah Kelleher, Danny Newcomb, John Fletcher, Rusty Earnshaw and Mark Bennett, where we will be discussing all things around skill acquisition, coaching, talent development, player development, you name it, we're there. Lots of opportunities. We get practical. There'll be some talks, some Q&As, lots of opportunities to do that. So head over to the website and look at the events page on the website, and you will there see the links to then be able to go and book. I'm pretty sure we're nearly at capacity, so if you're thinking of going or you can get there, then I would recommend doing that as quickly as you possibly can. Anyway, on to this week's episode. You find me this week having one of my kitchen table conversations with Kendall McQuaid, my longtime friend and relatively recent golf coach. He also coaches my little boy. And after one of our sessions, we've been out for a meal and we've got back and we're sitting just having a cup of coffee chatting, and usually, as always, the conversation turns to coaching, and that's when I press record on my device. And so you hear us starting to talk about things around technique, exploring the different challenges with our respective sports, hockey, golf, and all things skill and human development. So I hope you enjoy. As usual, we get into the weeds, but I think there's a few bits of gold in the in between the general flotsam and jetsam of our conversation. Any thoughts, ideas, observations, please send them through to me on email. Any questions, because I'm going to be doing an Ask Me Anything episode coming up fairly shortly, and I'll try and answer as many questions as possible. So please fire those through. I'll tend to prioritise the ones who come in from people who are supporters of the podcast, and if you're not a supporter and you want to help out a little bit, buy a cup of coffee each month or something along those lines, then you can do so by heading over to the website and hitting the Become a Patron button. Anyway, that's enough of that. In the meantime, I give you Kendall McQuaid.
And yet, the way somebody would be taught, say, to hit a hockey ball, would be stood still, with the ball probably still, but maybe moving a little bit, to another person or against a fence or something along those lines.
Which again on the behalf.
Well, no, I mean it needs to be moving, and you need to be moving, because it's not often you get the opportunity to be more or less static and then hit it.
I presume you must kill a ball, do you?
When you mean kill it, you mean trap it?
Just to stop it.
Yes.
And then you'll hit it. So I suppose it is stationary.
Well,
if you're lucky enough to have that.
Yes. However, it's rarely entirely stationary, because
apart from penalty.
Yeah, I mean, as in completely still. So a penalty.
And then you're not still.
Exactly, I'm not still.
You then move.
I then move. And I have to adapt based on whatever the need is. It's almost impossible that it would be exactly still. Almost impossible that there could be a moment whereby I would literally be, the ball would move, because I would move the ball to a position to be able to hit it. So it would be moving. I would never just go, right, stop it dead, now I'm going to hit it. It would never happen. It would take too long. And it would be like odd. It would be an odd thing to do. And actually, as players become more proficient, they are actually more proficient at moving. They don't ever stand still, because they know that actually standing still gives opponents opportunities to target you more readily, whereas if you move, it's much harder for them to kind of get a bearing on you to be able to close you down in a way that might stop you from passing or stop you from, or to tackle you. It's amazing though. No, sorry, it's not amazing. It's one of the things that I'm always working on with players, because they always want to stand still in order to execute a move. Largely, I believe that is because that's how they've learned to do the move. So it's like, I want to get to the position that I learnt it from in order to do it. And so as a result, that stillness gets them into all sorts of trouble. And then they're in reactive mode.
So, again, not long. But if you looked at the best hockey players in the world, the ones that do things that are just like edge of the seat, is there a player in Holland that you think, wow, Lionel Messi in golf football? You must have those, do you?
Loads.
Or Peterson in cricket?
Loads, yeah.
Who do things that others don't?
Yes.
Who move their body in a way that maybe others don't, or whatever.
Yes.
Was that taught?
Again, I guess it depends on how you
Coached.
Yeah, how you refer to taught. So, was it taught as in, was it explicitly said, you need to do this, you need to do that? Maybe not. Was it, however, did they have experiences that enabled them to find ways of moving? Nearly always, yes. And also, the only way I could be certain of that is, for example, if I knew all of their backstories. So for all I know, for example, some of them could have been, the sons or daughters of international sportsmen who were in the garden with them every day or wherever, going, do it this way, look at this, look at that, look at the other. Or they've got an older... It's interesting, actually, a lot of the young children that I'm coaching, or the 11-year-olds, the ones who are super proficient or tend to be proficient over and above their peers are the ones with the older sibling. So they've either had lots of, I've got to have a go, I've got to beat my older brother, older sister, and so they're trying hard and catching up, or the older brother's actually shown them how to do it because they've got the kind of skill themselves, because they've learnt it from somewhere, wherever that might be, and they pass it on. Knowing most older siblings, it's unlikely that they're going to give their younger sibling the technique themselves unless they're a lot older and therefore there's no actual immediate threat. I mean, I know this, there is a boy actually in a local club who's just streets ahead of everybody else, and he's got an older brother who's about 5 or 6 years older who plays sort of like first team, and you can see he's been taught stuff. You can actually physically see it because he does stuff that others don't do. So it's interesting with someone like him. He does these actions, and often they're actions that it's like, I wonder why you made that choice. I wonder why you chose to do that when there were lots of other things that you could have chosen to do, that if you didn't have that movement or technique, you may not have, because you didn't have it available to you, you might have chosen something else that might have actually solved the problem for you in a better way. And so it's very interesting to watch. He's got this super amazingly skillful in comparison to his peers, and then he'll do stuff and you're like, why did you do that? And I'm convinced it's because he's got a move that he can do and he wants to do it. So it's kind of interesting. Anyway, just so going back to your point of, does it it's interesting. I think it's a combination, isn't it? Of I don't know if it is taught. Some of it probably is, but for a lot of them, I think it emerges through exposure to lots. I mean, what's interesting is you talk about Alex Danson, right? So she's like one of our top Olympians, right? Blah blah blah. She talks a lot about. She used to play with her dad in the hall. They had hallway hockey, small little area trying to beat each other. She used to play hallway hockey all the time. So there you go. So she's exposed to this experience. Who knows how it translates later on? But they kind of nearly always tell those kinds of stories. I seem to think.
Yeah, well, yeah. And even in football, I always remember from many years ago, Paul Gascoigne, and he had a sense of awareness that you think, how did he know that player was there when he just laid it off into what looked like for other players would have been open space, but somehow he knew there was somebody running onto that ball. Where did that come from? It's almost like beyond understanding in a way.
Yeah.
But Peterson as a cricketer, and you're looking at that and thinking, is that something that he just wanted to be different? I want to do things that no one's ever done with a cricket bat or whatever. Seri.
Or often those individuals are less constrained by convention, either because they had let's call it an alternative upbringing, so they weren't necessarily exposed or conditioned by orthodoxy. Often, so if you take someone like Lasith Malinga in cricket, who essentially slings it out, his arm is more or less lateral to the ground, horizontal to the ground, as opposed to sort of, you'd never see that emerge from England, ever. You would never see a player do that, ever.
Because it wouldn't be allowed.
Wouldn't be allowed. It would be tough, because of course, I imagine, could be wrong here, but I imagine during his childhood, he got that wrong a lot.
Yeah.
It would have gone everywhere for a while. It would have flung at people's heads, it would have gone wide, but for some reason, he continued with a method that then eventually meant that he was one of the best death bowlers in the world, because he could deliver the ball in such a way that it made the ball dip at rapid velocity, just because of the nature of the aerodynamics of the way the ball's delivered. So a lot of other people are looking to get the ball to move in the air laterally, to curve, in order to... his action meant that he got the ball to move, but it would go down or up, more often than not down. So he had this completely almost unplayable Yorker, which meant that in the final overs of a game, sometimes critical moment where boundaries are the people couldn't hit him. So he's developed this particular action, right, that just wouldn't, and that's because he grew up in a place where there probably wasn't access to orthodox methods. Mm-hmm. And somebody like Peterson, again, I don't know his backstory that well, but I imagine, if I was to sort of dig into it a little bit more, that there is an element of that somewhere. Either he grew up in an environment that didn't afford him exposure to orthodox techniques and methods, or he rejected it, or he was given the confidence and the support. Yeah, so he's probably been in he's not had exposure, or the likelihood is that he's rejected it because of a quirk of his nature, say, or he's encouraged to do so by, say, a parent who says, don't listen to what they tell you, you do it your way. There's a range of factors in play here potentially. And so he's never had a notion of there's a right way to do something. He's always just had a notion of there's a problem to be solved. And so one of the reasons I think you get these individuals who come up with these so-called creative or alternative solutions, I don't really see it as super creative. What I see is an individual who's unconstrained by orthodoxy, trying to solve a problem. And it's a problem that makes sense to them. And then what fascinates me is you always then see people who try to emulate that. So then it becomes part of orthodoxy.
Yeah.
And it always fascinates. It's like, oh, well, such and such an elite player can do it. That's okay now, right? So we'll allow kids to do that because such and such does it. Sonny Bill Williams offload. You ever seen that? So he can hold. He played a lot of rugby league. He's played rugby league and rugby union. But in a rugby league world, they nearly always try and tackle you low, one player, and then somebody else comes, or sometimes three players, but that tackle you high so that you can't release the ball. Because releasing the ball in the tackle is quite advantageous potentially, because you're trapping two or three players together, and then all of a sudden there must be some space elsewhere. He's learnt over the years to be able to fend a player off with one hand, and because he's only got one hand to pass with, he couldn't, particularly if he's passing from right to left and he's holding left to right and he's holding the ball with his right hand, he found it hard to do it sort of with his hand sort of underneath it. So he turns his hand over and sort of pushes it. It's extremely successful. And now you see kids doing it. Now previously, before that was an available technique, the Sonny Bill offload, an acceptable technique, seen as acceptable in the international arena, our coach or coaches with children trying something like that would be told, that is not what we're trying to do here, son. Use two hands, do it properly. He does this, that's his approach, and now all of a sudden we can all do that. And it fascinates me that that's how things tend to work. New orthodoxies emerge because of the creativity of an individual trying to solve a problem.
You might even see a mass introduction of one-handed hockey players. You never know.
As I was saying that, I thought you might well bring that up. Yeah, I could see that mischievous glint in your eye.
It's funny, just what we were talking about yesterday as well, that golf tends to be, we provide a solution with good basics, sound technique, rather than providing a problem. Because I think the reality is in golf that the solution is not providing a solution. The perceived solution tends to have someone look as if they should be able to solve the problem.
Yeah.
So they look like a golfer. Basics are sound. Swing's actually not bad. Can't play. So I suppose that's why next week Stephen Orr and I are doing our second Coaching What You Can't See seminar for the PGA. And that is trying to get under the bonnet of, we've got somebody who looks like a golfer that can't play, and we've got somebody who doesn't really look like a golfer but can seriously play. What is going on to under there that is evoking learning and allowing learning to happen? Because it's that. I think the providing of a solution is almost robbing people of finding their own solution. It's robbing them of failure, which they might think, well, that's a good thing, but it's not. It's how learning happens. And I think if you do it enough, you then create that dependency, don't you? That says, well, somebody else has always got the solution because Dad had it when I was a wee boy, and now my coach has got it as my bigger boy, but it's not really them providing their own problems to then explore finding a solution, and the ownership then is it's fine. It takes time, of course it does. And people will say it's a much longer process. Well, I'm watching all these people with supposedly sound basics coming over the top and pull cutting it, so they haven't solved it. So it's not as if being told what to do has actually provided skill. So I don't know how they can justify saying it takes longer if you're going to go through the problem solving bit, because they haven't solved the problem anyway. So they've only been doing it 40 years right now, so maybe they need to give them time. But yeah, that to me is a big thing in golf, and much more interesting in hockey, because it's a constant shifting sand of problems. Never the same problem. Just a myriad of problems, whereas too often in golf, same problem, 7-iron, on a mat, in the winter, 100 times the same problem as here. I'm sure your brain must be crying out for some variety. Please don't let's do this again. Please don't ask me to concentrate on my right knee again. But as long as the solution is the right knee, then you've got to do it. So
just follow the. But it's fascinating, even what you talk about there, the dynamics of a game, say like hockey, football, whatever. How prevalent this notion that if I learn a technique or a movement pattern in isolation. So, for example, I learned to carry the ball in isolation of another individual. So, I'm going to learn. They call it ball mastery, and it's and often it's just time spent with a ball, moving with a ball, sometimes directed by there might be a cone. And it's moving around and maybe moving around these cones and dribbling around these cones. And, I saw it not long ago in hockey session. I thought we'd managed to eradicate this idea, but no, there was a line of cones. It weren't even a line of cones that were like higgledy-piggledy and had some irregularity. Yeah. They were in a straight line. And the players had to dribble through these cones. And they didn't really have to move the ball any distance, just move around it. Even if they'd made the cones like on angles so that you actually had to move the ball quite a distance, that would have been something. But no, straight line of cones. And of course, you've got these players learning to move the ball like that, and then all of a sudden they come into a game context and somebody else stands in front of them, and lo and behold, when they move the ball, they move too. And now we've got a different problem to solve, because what I learned to do without anybody else being there is move the ball. I never considered that I had to move the ball in relation to the way you were moving. Oh, no. And then the next thing is, because my attention's been moved away from the ball to you, because you're a problem, now I'm going to lose control of this ball because my attention's moved away. Or I'm going to lose a sense of what I now need. I can't think of what I now need to do now. So what you often see a lot of is a player has no perception of the space that they need between the opponent and themselves in order to effectively carry the ball around that individual, eliminate, for example. So more often than not, what happens is they kind of run, kind of in a straight line. They arrive at the problem, i.e. the opponent, and then they go, oh, I've got to do something. And it's too late, because that individual's on top of them. And they can't react enough in time. They haven't got the solutions that have been learned in that level of proximity. And they get done. And because they've never conceived of the problem in the way of it's me and you, and that's the problem that we need to explore, they've never conceived of that problem ever before, they haven't got there's no reference point to determine success or failure or whether that's right. It's just something that happened in the game. And they do it over and over and over again. Over and over and over again. And people get dead frustrated by it. They're like going, why do you keep doing the same thing over and over again? It's not a surprise, is it? Because I learnt a movement pattern when there was no one else there, and I'm just sort of assuming that that's what we're going to do. Now, okay, over a period of time they sort of do get it if they get enough goes.
So, not playing devil's advocate, but
yeah,
there must be skills being developed when they're actually having to control the ball with the stick. So there must be some kind of benefit.
Of course.
But it sounds then as if you could only truly develop the skills if you had human beings opposing you, trying to get the ball or whatever.
Yeah.
Could you do it in a virtual way? Could you practice using your imagination?
Yeah.
So you can imagine, I can't think that Lionel Messi hasn't been in the garden or the park in Argentina and just imagined running at a defence and imagining what the player did, that slide tackle that he's seen or experienced, and he just did a shimmy and then he did a drag back and he did this and he did that, went through and scored, and there's nobody around, just Lionel Messi. So is that a possible solution to a hockey when you don't have opposing players? Could you play with your imagination? Is that something that's done in your coaching field?
Yeah, 100%. And this is one of the kind of criticisms, I think, sometimes levelled, which is there's no role for individual practice. So people often say, well, of course you do individual practice. Yeah, and I totally get that, and I'm on board as well. I definitely want kids in the garden or wherever it is, kind of imagining scoring the winning goal in the World Cup, or and you hear about it all the time in the world of golf, don't you? Holding the putt at the Open Championship and all these sorts of things, imagining placing themselves in that space. Brilliant. You want that to be as rich as possible. One of the ways in which to enrich that experience is, I think, for them to take situations that they've encountered in their learning space, practice space, and to get, because they're now quite real for them as a problem that they haven't quite yet been able to solve, and for them then to go into their garden space when they haven't got anybody else around, and to sort of start to think about that a little bit whilst they're doing their ball mastery. The irony, though, is that when they come to the training space, there's other people. So we've got the opportunity to use the other people to do this lovely perception, action, skill environment, but we choose not to. So we forget. So we put them into isolated training when there's other people that they could have this more enriched experience. Yeah. So there was a guy on the podcast a while back from Bristol Academy, and he said that's what they did. They used to do it that way. So, for example, because the kids used to play in backyard or street games when they were all that sort of stuff, when they'd come to the academy, they'd tend to work a little bit more on some of their individual technical capabilities because they didn't get exposure to that. But it's flipped now because kids don't play in the backyard games type environment now. So actually the likelihood is they do the individual practice at home in the back garden where they're, in inverted commas, safe, and they do the gamey stuff, the backyard game stuff, in the academy where they don't get exposure to it otherwise. It's kind of interesting how that's flipped.
It's funny just listening to you. I'm thinking, how does that look in golf? So most people go to the range to fix something.
Yeah.
It'd be great bit of survey research, whatever you want to call it, to find out when people are practicing golf. And I'm talking about the general golfing public, not the better or elite players or the pros. What are they going to the range to do? And I would have thought it would be primarily to fix something, to solve a problem that they're doing in the golf swing, or something that's wrong in their golf swing. And very, very seldom is it going to develop a skill. So that's not, I don't think you would tend to find people going to the range and saying, I'm just going to work on my knockdown fade. It tends not to be the...
Yeah, in general, yeah.
In general, or taking it to another complete level. If we agree that feel and awareness that the best players have for the club, that means they can move the club in a way that will produce the outcome, that would never be a comment I think you would ever hear at a range, certainly in the UK, that someone maybe on leaving the practice ground would say, yeah, I just spent the last hour heightening my awareness and exploring limitlessly. So I think they'd probably be looked at some disdain and think, you're mad, you've been at the bar before, you went to the range, because nobody would say that. But that's beyond what we can see, and yet it's what we would probably believe drives learning, the movement pattern. Experiential learning is driven by that awareness and that exploration, isn't it? But we don't do that. We almost do the opposite of that. We would poo-poo exploration. Mm. When Dad says stop hitting that 60 degree around the green when you duffed it, you just take a 7-iron and bump up there. Dad's only interested in outcome, and kids are actually interested in exploring and having fun and messing about. And we all know that 10 years later he'll probably be able to hit every shot with a 60 degree around the green and not be a multi-club guy. But Dad wants him to perform now, and therefore exploration is almost curtailed. But could you imagine someone coming back talking about how heightened their awareness was during that session? Club awareness, maybe club and body awareness. But nobody's saying that, is it?
Not really.
No. They don't go with their goal very, very seldom would be to learn new shots. Mm. It would be to work on something technical in their swing.
Or, more often than not, and I've been there, they'll go on the basis that if they hit enough balls, they'll find something.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll be, so they'll be hitting, horrible, hitting, horrible, that was okay. Hitting, horrible. Oh, that was okay. What was it I did there?
Yeah.
Right. Oh, I think I did that. Let's try this again. Oh, maybe that's it. And over a period of time, it's like I've hit a lot of balls and now I've got something. I've found something. I'm not quite sure what it is, but if I do this and I'm moving that way and I do that, then it seems to go straight. And it's like, right, now I'm okay.
Yeah.
And then they take that away, thinking that they've kind of got that. And then, sure as eggs is eggs. It might work maybe for the immediate round or whatever, but then after a while it's like, oh, that's not working anymore. That didn't work. And it's like, again, it's this idea that you're just groping around in this. Some of that, I think, tends to come from the fact that people don't know where to place their awareness. Because you always talk about this, about the task. What is the task? What is this problem that we're trying to solve, and what are the mechanisms of solution? And a lot of people don't have that. They don't have anything. They don't have any knowledge of body awareness, or they don't have enough information to be able to say that it's about it's about something in their body. They haven't got enough feedback loops. So, and then of course, somebody comes along and goes, by the way, it's this, and they go, oh, is it? Oh, okay. Keep your head down, the classics, yeah? Or you're coming over the top. Jules, funnily enough, friend of ours, who you've been working with, recently was telling me, and may have told you this, that he was arranged with some friends who are, decent players, sort of low handicappers, who then started to give him a load of information about the things he was doing wrong. Or the things in his swing that weren't quite right. And he said he came away from it and he was like, he's like going, oh my God, I wasn't aware of these things and they showed me on video, and it doesn't look quite right, does it? And I said to him, but how are you now doing when you hit? He says, oh God, it's rubbish. I'm nowhere near where I need to be. So I said, well, have they helped then? Because previously, we're only talking about 2 or 3 sessions in reality. So previously, he'd gone from somebody who topped the ball pretty consistently, contact with the ball was almost non-existent, to within 3 sessions, someone who had almost completely eradicated that form of poor contact with the ball, that saw the ball arrive kind of like 2 yards in front of him and all that sort of stuff. Hardly ever did that. It was like a surprise if it did, towards somebody who now propelled the ball a decent distance, not always with the correct direction, but nearly always did. And as a result, his enjoyment of the game had gone up exponentially. And he'd gone from that to that. And then someone comes along, maybe well-meaning, saying, oh, it doesn't look right. Look what it looks like. You need to do this. And then his awareness is now placed somewhere else, and all of a sudden he's now no longer attuned to the task, and now all of a sudden he's kind of almost like lost and back to square one. And it's just fascinating how this happens. But time and again it does.
Well, you probably couldn't argue, although maybe those people educated enough in the golfing world to know truly what is right and wrong, other than it looks weird. But I think a lot of the time people could be giving feedback that is good feedback. So a bit you mentioned yesterday, I've always felt I cast the club at the top. So that's back to that coaching what we can see. So I can see Stuart Armstrong is casting, so let's
solve
stop
that.
it.
Yeah.
Let's imagine you're doing this or that or the next thing to stop it. But if you're going to get a little bit deeper and really understand that, what fascinates me is, why is Stuart Armstrong casting at the golf club? Because if we don't get to that, we'll never actually get to finding a solution or help Stuart find a solution. So there has to be a reason for someone moving. You don't move for no reason. So why did it move like that? And why does somebody come over the top and swing the club left when they're trying to actually direct the ball forward? Why would you do that? So you can just attack what you can see, or you can try and go a little bit deeper and understand, well, what is at the heart of that movement pattern, and can we then change it? And there's a lot of the time we would say there's probably only two reasons. And one would be lack of task clarity, and I include in that how the tools work and how they need to move to produce a solution, or misdirected attention. And that would be a big one, and both of them would be massive, but not an understanding of how the club moves to produce an outcome. And it's so obvious, it's so stupidly obvious, that when you do say to someone who's never really thought about what the club needed to do to play a golf shot, I mean, they must think, how stupid am I? Because we sold the solution that said if you hold it like this and stand with your feet like that, keep your head down and swing slow, the ball will go straight. When if we'd started with, if we can move this tool in this way, tell me, as a beginner, tell me if the ball would go straight. And of course someone will look at a golf club moving, without even hitting the ball in slow motion. If I moved the club towards the target, with the face facing towards the target, and asked a total novice, do you think the ball would go straight? They'll say, yeah. I said, great, because it'll actually go straight for you, for me, for Tiger Woods, for Rory McIlroy, for everyone, won't it? Because it's just physics at work. So actually that is the problem we're trying to solve. I find it amazing how often I ask people how the club needs to move, and it's like, I've no idea. So they don't even know what the problem is. So there's no chance of finding a solution, is there? And as you say, they kind of flounder about and find some feeling that isn't a solution. It's almost like a state change, that a little bit of a confidence boost, that, I found something. I just need to complete my backswing and then everything's okay. And somehow that provided some kind of solution, but it was temporary. It wasn't anything to do with skill or true learning. But that amazes me. And that's where we have to start, isn't it? If we're going to coach golf effectively, we have to start with that understanding.
Coach anything effectively.
Anything.
Yeah.
Because that then evokes a hold. That then should evoke, with some time and guidance, maybe not even time and guidance, well, certainly time, but maybe not necessarily guidance, it should then evoke a movement. And then that'll then involve hundreds, maybe thousands of failures, which should be reflected on, and a little bit of a micro adjustment will be made, and then eventually, and you did it yesterday, when you were extremely frustrated at your ability to use the little speed ball and hit at the mat where you aimed, which was amazing, wasn't it? But left alone, you found a solution. But we sell the solution before clarifying the problem. And we never, ever, ever are going to hand the ownership over to the player, or really have them engage in effective practice, because that should be their whole driving force from the day they come into the game. And you ask them, say, all I'm trying to do is get better at moving the club like this, because I know if I do, that'll happen. And then I'm going to try and learn to move the club like that, because if I do that, I know that'll happen. And that's going to be skill. And I'm working on finding a position and a hold, and really sort of feeling what the club's doing, and then learning from each and every experience. That is not how coaching is. It wasn't how I coached for 20 years, and it wasn't how I was coached. But it's how I want to help people.
Do you know, though, it's interesting, because this misconception of learning and the learning process, I think, is very prevalent. And the reason for this is that, I speak to a lot of coaches and do a lot of coach development stuff. And one of the things I talk about a lot, because we're often talking about the nature of skill, the nature of practice design, the nature of learning environments. The question I pose is that, so I think you need to have real clarity as to what the problems that the game presents are. What are these problems that we're trying to solve? And it's amazing the answers I get. And the lack of clarity about what the problems that the game itself presents. I actually think they're relatively simple. I think you really think about it, and I mean, you have to boil it down, obviously, and you're very much simplifying, and there's obviously layers on layers on layers, but people often, so in my world of an invasion game like hockey, and most invasion games will more or less have the same, people call them principles of play necessarily. I don't see them as that. I actually see them as, what are the problems that you need to try and solve? Well, one of them is, I need to be able to carry the ball, to move it towards the objective, which is a goal. So I need to be able to carry the ball. There's lots of ways of carrying the ball, but that's the problem. Carry it. And the problem presented is that there's a group of other individuals who are going to try and stop me from making forward progress. So I'm going to probably at some stage have to carry the ball around one or two of them, if not all of them. So actually, the ways in which I'm going to choose to do that, we need to explore. But fundamentally, the problem is I've got to be able to carry the ball to be able to make forward progress. And then there might be another one, which might be I've got to be able to move the ball to other teammates. And there's lots of ways of doing that. But fundamentally, I need to be able to do that. And that all, again, has to be in relation to my teammates, where they are, where they're moving, and where the opponents are and where they're moving, and the ways in which I might choose to move the ball will be determined by that. So that's something else we can explore. And likewise, defending, we need to maybe sort of reduce the amount of space and time for the opponents to be able to choose their actions and make so that's something else we need to do together and as individuals, and there's a whole range of dynamics as far as that's concerned. But when I talk about these problems, and we have to go through a process of exploration to start to strip away some of the peripheral stuff. So, like, I say, what are the problems that the game presents? Well, you need teamwork. Well, yes, you do, but what is it in the game, inherently in the game? And like, they need to withstand pressure. Yes, that is definitely inherent. But in the actual game, what about the game? They often talk about the performer in the game. I'm talking about what's the game itself, or the game it presents. And it's just fascinating how people don't think of the sport in the sense of the game. Yes, they think about the performer and what the performer needs to do, but it's got to be in relation to the problem that the game presents. Mm-hmm. And so one of the ways we think about that now in the hockey world is we think about it as a dynamic interplay. They've referred to it as the end in mind, which I don't quite get, but I sort of see what they're saying, which is that actually how a learning environment needs to be cognizant of the qualities of the performer or the capabilities of the performer based on the problems that the game is asking them to succeed, and the learning environment needs to be somehow reflective of those things. So those three dynamics, game problem, performer capability, learning environment, are what forms the basis of how we now conceive of creating opportunities for learning. But traditionally it's just been the performer. No conception of the game problem, just purely, you talk about golf. All they're trying to do is to get the performer to move in a certain way. But not related to the problem that the game presents at all. Not even related to the utilisation of the tool that helps you to play the game. Because your conception of how the game is played is, yes, it's all about getting the ball towards the hole and all that sort of stuff. But ultimately it's about, well, fundamentally when it comes down to it, there's a tool that does this. The club. How you move that tool changes the way in which you perceive, the way you even perceive the problem.
I think that's why, and we've mentioned this before, when we see even less skilled golfers in the trees, faced with low-hanging branches, but a possible outcome, that they can almost let go of everything they know about golf that they think they know, and they do what you've just said. So they start to then access, okay, well, if I'm stuck in this position here and I need to get the ball out there, it needs to bend a little bit that way. They start messing about and swinging and practice swinging and regripping and changing and altering, because it's almost as if they're accessing what they need to be accessing when they're in the middle of the fairway. And quite often you'll see a nice little recovery shot comes out onto the middle of the fairway, then it's back to the normal stuff, so they're 50 yards from the green and they hit it 80 yards right. So they've just produced a bit of genius and magic, accessed their true learning capabilities, and then straight back to a conditioned response that says, oh yeah, I'm in the middle of the fairway now, I can concentrate on keeping my head down and my left arm straight, or whatever. And of course missing the learning experience I just had is gone. And that is just back to, as you said, it's a problem that they're not used to being faced with, and it evoked what we're brilliant at, and that is solving problems with tools, because we are. Hockey is a tool, isn't it? And I know you've got that issue with your one-handed hockey shots players, whatever they're doing with their stick in one hand, but my question still is why. I don't know,
it's the way they perceive the task, for sure.
Why do they do that? Why does a kid given a golf club, why do they, in the main, grip it left below right, split-handed?
Yeah.
Or right below left, split-handed. You will never ever see a child who knows nothing about golf, never exposed to golf, pick up a golf club and even probably have their hands close together.
Yeah.
So we then kick that into touch, don't we?
Yeah.
But why? What do they know that I probably should know to help them? It's almost as if this pure ball of learning potential, I'm going to start shutting down right now if I get them to do it right.
Yeah.
And that has to be wrong, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If they arrive at a grip eventually that they've discovered through us allowing them to do that, that's definitely a very different experience, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then you ask them, why do you hold the club at that? I said, well, I've discovered that this is the best way to hit these shots. The answer for most people is, this is how I was told to hold it.
Yeah.
And the kids are splitting their hands because they know that's control.
Yeah.
They do it in hockey.
Yeah.
What they'll eventually learn is that speed may require a different hold.
Yeah.
But why, in a way I always thought, I wonder why we don't have different grips in golf. So why don't we potentially have round the green a split-handed hockey hold, where control is almost more important than speed. And then they have a speed hold in golf when they're on the tee.
Yeah. I mean, in putting, it's interesting, in putting it's become more prevalent, hasn't it? Still viewed with a bit of, when you see somebody with the left hand below right, or when you see somebody with a split hand or a claw grip, it's always deemed that they're somehow doing so because they are deficient.
Yep.
They can't do it properly, so they're doing it that way because they've got some issue or whatever it is, as opposed to seeing it as that's actually just their way of solving this particular problem. What I've thought about putting as well is that why more people don't use different grips in putting depending on the task. So for example, why haven't you got your long putt grip and your short putt grip? And do you know what I mean?
I definitely know what you mean, and it reminds me of a story of a very good friend of mine, Paul Affleck, who played in the European Tour for 8 years, and he remembers the day, and I was sure he said it was the Portuguese Open, but he remembered the day that his long putt yipping started. And
that's never heard of, is it? Long putt yipping.
He remembers doing it. He remembers it was maybe a flowering the story slightly. I think it was a 3-tier green. He was at the front edge, pin was at the back, and he remembered thinking to himself, I can't get that there. So between his setup and his hold, he kind of knew he couldn't generate enough force, or he didn't think he could, and he was right. But during the stroke, he made this amazing little snappy yip, which got the putt there, but 15 feet left. And it sort of really resonated with him as a, whoa, that's not good. But if we looked at any putting hold, in the main, of even the best players in the world, how far could they hit that ball using that putting hold?
Yeah.
So could they hit it 20 yards? Yeah, possibly. 50 yards? Maybe. 300 yards? Not a chance. So they would have to have a new hold, don't they? But would you say that the hold for speed that a lot of these guys have got, is Dustin Johnson's hold still providing them with amazing control, but 300 miles an hour speed? 300 yards worth of speed? Yeah, would appear to be. So why are we holding the putter in that way? Because it's almost as if the limit of that hold is, it is so biased towards controlling things, it's detrimental to be able to deliver force. And that's why I've always struggled to think, why do we have a different hold, really? But I do get it as well. If it wasn't like a sliding scale, so the short putt, I had my big hold for control, and as the putts got longer, I moved more towards my speed hold, and then eventually that speed hold became a normal hold for power shots. It's interesting. I think that's what the kids, in a way, know.
No, yeah.
And no one's told them. They just know that this is a better way to hold this stick. But Dad's now told me I need to connect my pinky and my forefinger together, and it feels awful, but Dad knows best, so I'll just keep doing it.
And I always feel that, going back to the point I was making earlier about the capabilities of the performer, that I think that the way of holding the implement, I think, will change over a period of time as the capabilities of the performer change. So, for example, with young children often who don't... So Isla's a really good example with golf. She's got split hands, or has done, but gets the club to the ball and the ball flies and it goes in the air sometimes. So, cool.
Yeah.
And my view is that one of the reasons that she does that is because there's a component of strength. Yeah. So she's got this implement that is heavy or has a degree of heaviness.
Yep.
And so instinctively she grabs it like that to think, well, this is the best way for me to actually move this thing through the air and get it towards this ball, because if I tried to put my hands at the top, God, that would feel all out of control and weird. So I'm going to hold it like this. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. Because ultimately, we're going to play a game here, and the game requires you to propel the ball, and if you were to hold it in a different way and couldn't propel the ball, what fun would that be?
Yep.
And as she gets older, and like you say, becomes more aware of a need, for example, to propel the ball further, because maybe she's playing on a bigger course, and also as she gets stronger, so the game problem changes and her capability changes, she may over a period of time begin to experiment. And again, we might raise her awareness of this, but she might begin her experiment of saying, actually, there's some limitations associated with holding the club in that way.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to think about doing this because it can help me to develop speed. But again, she'd need to I think she'd need some help on how she perceives that particular problem in order to help with the exploratory process of discovering how she could generate speed. You certainly did that with me yesterday. We were talking about generating club head speed. So firstly, you changed the implement I was using, of this ridiculous thing with no weight in it whatsoever. That was the most bizarre perception, by the way, when I got my club back and it felt like I was holding a brick. It was so bizarre.
You wanted to go split-handed?
I did. So to explore speed, let's change the implement so that we can explore and have a heightened awareness of the generation of speed and what that might feel like. And then let's also explore how the various options are available to us in terms of the way we would hold the club in order to generate maximum velocity, maximum speed. And that exploratory process was really useful. I may not have got there myself. I may have carried on with the way I normally hold, but just tried to generate loads of speed. So actually just saying, well, here's a different thing to hold, which will give you different sensations, and let's explore different ways of holding, which will give you different sensations. Which of those now do you feel are helping you to generate maximum velocity? That's a really fantastic discovery process. And we were limited by time, because obviously the people who own the practice facility clearly aren't bothered about making money.
Threw us off. Dusk was on the sign, it said 10 till dusk, didn't it?
There was that constraint of light.
Our argument about when dusk fell was we were on a losing.
Yeah, it was.
There.
And you were, I think, also
dusk,
you were hoping that it would go dark and we'd be able to continue doing it, because then I'd purely be in exploratory mode, because I wouldn't be able to see where the ball flew. I knew what you were thinking. It's fascinating.
Well, the funny thing is about just listening to you, I'm wondering if we had done that again yesterday and we got that very light implement that you felt you could create and generate some more speed, and you did. Even though when you saw the video of yourself creating speed, you were less than impressed. You thought, especially when I showed you my 15-year-old girl outgunning you with speed, and you thought, hold on, when is my video coming up? I said, no, that is you, Stuart.
Yeah, I noticed you didn't give me a comparative video to show me actually how I had developed speed. Maybe because I didn't.
So going back, the interesting comment that everybody says when they go back is, wow, how heavy a golf club is. But and just what you said, do the kids pick it up? Whatever we feel, but we think this club's very light, but it's not to a 6-year-old or a 5-year-old, is it? It could be very, very heavy.
They've probably never picked up an implement with that amount of weight right at the end of it before.
No. So a split hand appears. So we're not going into the garden and picking up the sledgehammer and thinking that the interlock is going to do it. You know, you're not going to be able to pick the sledgehammer up if you're using an interlock grip. I don't care how well your hands work together. You can't pick it up, can you? So why do you pick it up the way you do, and why are your hands where they are? And because that's us accessing that amazing ability to solve this problem, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And yet we turn our back on the kids picking it up in the way that they believe will give them control to potentially solve the problem. And again, as you say, as they develop more strength and power, that can be adjusted and exploration can go towards maybe a grip that might afford more speed. But why would we knock that in the head from day one? Why would we say, no, this is how you need to hold it? When Dad can't help himself. But I think it's more interesting, and you've almost just opened it up there, that it's probably very heavy for the kids. Despite you and I picking up thinking it can't be any lighter. And going back to you yesterday with the light ball and the speed ball, when you went to your own club, it would have been interesting if we had actually done a little bit of exploration by separating your hands slightly. Yeah. And what do you feel now if you just gave yourself a 10-finger baseball or even a slight split baseball, kind of Mo Norman-esque? Would that have afforded you more control, but still allowed you to create speed? And the answer is I don't know, but would it have made it feel a little bit more as if you could wield it more effectively?
Yeah, probably.
Rather than this is unwieldy.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what it almost felt.
Although, ironically, one of the discoveries from yesterday was the sensation of needing control was actually somehow at the heart of the problem, which was limiting my ability to produce speed because of the sensation of the need of control. And actually, one of the things I had to get used to was the sensation of certainly a perceived loss of control. Because I said to you at one point, it feels like I'm wrapping it around my neck. Because it felt like I was losing control of the club head at the top of the backswing, because as I was sort of creating this kind of force and velocity and this kind of release and this whip almost, that's a natural consequence, when you think about it technically. But to me, that feels really wrong. That feels out of control. Yeah. So what I've learned over the years in terms of the other sports I play, and also in golf, where I've learned that, to have control of the club head means that I have more chance of propelling the ball in the direction I want to propel it. And so as a result, I've clearly over a period of time learned that I want to sacrifice distance and speed and all those sorts of things in an effort to get some level of accuracy, whether that's conscious or unconscious, subconscious.
And that then becomes your conditioned response.
Indeed.
And it wasn't you were losing control, it was probably you were over-controlling.
Over-controlling, exactly.
So then something that has freedom to it feels out of control. And as Fred Shoemaker says, you have to let go if you want to gain control.
Yeah.
But that can be scary, letting go.
Yeah.
And that probably applies to many things other than golf.
And there was 2 or 3 trials when I was, when we were eventually sort of hitting balls, there was 2 or 3 trials where I was like, no, try to control it. Could feel myself controlling it. So I had a
choice.
No,
just happened.
So kind of like involuntary. But at least I was beginning to understand. I was able to compare, and I had a sense of that, a sense of that's a controlly one. Oh, that's a released one. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't necessarily based on the outcome of the ball flight. It was just based on the sensation of that. Now, as it happened, it tended to be when I did release it, I tended to get somewhere near the intended ball flight. And on 1 or 2 occasions, as I reported to you, good Lord, I don't think I've ever hit a golf ball like that before.
Yeah, and that word release to me was then something that was happening and not something you made happen. Because I think a lot of people think releasing a golf club is something you do, whereas I think it's something you let happen.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that was a massive takeaway. It's about something that I let happen. But that's like weird. It's a weird concept because then, as you've said to me before, most golfers are operating somewhere between hope and fear. And obviously there's a lot of fear. And if you let things happen in golf, All sorts of things can go wrong.
Yeah.
But that's the counterintuitive nature of the game.
It is. That courage to let go.
Courage. As always, thank you for spending time over my kitchen table and discussing these matters with me.
Thank you for my bagel and tea.
And I'm looking forward to our next activity because you've once again sparked curiosity.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Talent Equation podcast. If you like the show, then please consider supporting it by leaving a review on your favorite podcast player, telling your friends about it, or even becoming a hero and show your appreciation by becoming a patron. Just head over to thetalentequation.co.uk and click on the Becoming a Patron button at the top of the page.